What if I told you that one of the most powerful kings in European history was so physically deformed that his own people believed he was cursed, not by fate or misfortune, but by dark, supernatural forces? This was no ordinary monarch. This was Charles II of Spain, a man whose very existence seemed to defy nature, whose body told a story of centuries of royal obsession, and whose tragic life would ultimately reshape the course of European history. Charles II was born into the Habsburg dynasty, a family that ruled vast territories across Europe, from Spain to Austria, and whose name was synonymous with power and prestige. But behind the grandeur and the glittering crowns lay a secret so dark and devastating that it would haunt the family for generations, an unrelenting obsession with keeping their bloodline pure. This obsession led to a practice that today we recognize as genetic inbreeding. Marriages between close relatives, cousins, uncles, and nieces, all in the name of preserving power and wealth within the family. The consequences of this practice were catastrophic. Charles II was a living embodiment of the genetic damage caused by centuries of inbreeding. His physical deformities were so severe that foreign ambassadors meeting him for the first time were reportedly shocked into silence. His jaw protruded grotesquely, his lips could not close, and his mouth hung open like a broken door. This condition, known as mandibular prognathism, was so pronounced that it earned the infamous nickname the Habsburg jaw. But Charles's deformities went far beyond his jaw. He was a man trapped in a frail, twisted body. At 35 years old, he looked like a child stretched and contorted by some cruel force. His head was disproportionately large, his limbs thin and skeletal, and his spine so curved that he appeared permanently hunched over. He was barely 5 feet tall, and he could not walk properly until he was 8 years old, a staggering delay compared to the average child. His physical frailty was matched by intellectual challenges. He struggled to read until he was 10 and never fully grasped complex concepts. His emotional state was fragile, prone to violent tantrums and long periods of withdrawal. The court whispered that Charles was cursed, bewitched by dark forces beyond human understanding. Priests performed exorcisms in the royal palace, forcing the king to endure hours of ritualistic torment in front of nobles and foreign dignitaries. They believed demons had taken residence in his body, causing his deformities and illnesses. But the truth was far more tragic and far less supernatural. Charles was a victim of his own family's relentless pursuit of power, a living experiment in genetic catastrophe. His deformities made even the most basic functions of life a struggle. Eating was a humiliating ordeal. Palace kitchens had to prepare his food as purees and liquids because his jaw and teeth made chewing impossible. His speech was nearly unintelligible, a wet, slurred mumble that even his courtiers struggled to understand. His mother, Queen Mariana, feared he might choke on his own tongue during sleep. The king of one of the most powerful empires in the world was considered a choking hazard. But perhaps the most devastating aspect of Charles's condition was his inability to produce an heir. He married twice, first to Marie Louise of Orleans and then to Maria Anne of Neuburg, but neither union produced children. His reproductive organs were underdeveloped, described by doctors of the time as infantile. The court blamed his wives for infertility, subjecting them to humiliating medical examinations and treatments, but the truth was that Charles was functionally impotent. This failure to produce an heir set the stage for a political crisis that would engulf Europe in war. When Charles died in 1700 at the age of 38, he left no successor. The War of Spanish Succession erupted, a brutal conflict involving multiple European powers vying for control of the Spanish throne. The Habsburg dynasty's obsession with genetic purity had not only destroyed one man, but had also triggered one of the deadliest wars in European history. The autopsy of Charles II revealed horrors that seemed to confirm the fears of his subjects. His heart was shriveled and blackened, his lungs corroded and gangrenous, and his intestines rotting inside his body. His brain was surrounded by an abnormal amount of fluid, explaining his intellectual disabilities. The royal physician who conducted the autopsy described the king's body as a miracle for having sustained life for so long despite containing no healthy organs. Charles' story is a chilling reminder of how the pursuit of power can blind even the greatest dynasties to the cost of their ambitions. It is a story of tragedy, science, superstition, and the limits of human biology. And it is a story that continues to fascinate historians and audiences alike, revealing the dark underbelly of royal history that textbooks often overlook. If you're ready to dive deeper into the life of this tragic king, to uncover the secrets behind his deformities, his struggles, and the political chaos that followed his death, then stay with me. Because this is not just a story about a deformed king. It's a story about the very nature of power, legacy, and the human cost of obsession. To truly understand the tragic life of Charles II, we need to go back to the roots of the Habsburg dynasty's obsession with bloodlines. The Habsburgs were one of the most powerful royal families in Europe, ruling over vast territories that included Spain, Austria, the Netherlands, and parts of Italy. Their power was built on strategic marriages designed to consolidate wealth and influence. But over time, this strategy morphed into something far more dangerous: a relentless pursuit of genetic purity through inbreeding. In the 16th and 17th centuries, the Habsburgs believed that marrying within the family was the best way to keep their power intact. Cousins married cousins, uncles married nieces, and the family tree became a tangled web of close relations. This practice, while politically expedient, had devastating biological consequences. The genetic pool became so limited that harmful recessive traits, normally rare in a diverse population, began to surface with alarming frequency. Charles II was the culmination of this genetic roulette. His parents were uncle and niece, and his grandparents on both sides were also closely related. This meant that Charles inherited a double dose of the same harmful genes, leading to a host of physical and mental deformities. The most visible of these was the infamous Habsburg jaw, a severe mandibular prognathism that caused his lower jaw to jut out so far that his lips could not close. This deformity was so pronounced that it became a defining feature of the Habsburg family, appearing in portraits and descriptions for generations. But Charles's condition was far worse than just a prominent jaw. His entire body was affected. He was born weak and sickly, unable to walk until he was 8 years old, a delay that would have been alarming even by the standards of the time. His limbs were thin and fragile, his torso compressed and hunched, and his head disproportionately large. His spine was severely curved, giving him a permanent stoop that made him appear much older and frilier than his actual age. The physical deformities were accompanied by intellectual disabilities. Charles struggled to learn and communicate. He did not learn to read until he was 10, and even then his comprehension was limited. His speech was slurred and difficult to understand, a direct result of his jaw deformity and possibly neurological impairments. Court tutors described teaching him as a frustrating and futile task, like trying to fill a broken vessel. Emotionally, Charles was fragile and volatile. He was prone to violent tantrums over minor frustrations, screaming and thrashing like a child denied a toy. These outbursts were often followed by long periods of withdrawal, where he would sit motionless for hours, staring blankly into space. His mental state was that of a toddler trapped in an adult's body, a tragic reflection of the genetic damage that had shaped his life. Despite his condition, Charles was king, the ruler of one of the most powerful empires in the world. But his physical and mental limitations made it difficult for him to fulfill the duties expected of a monarch. His speech was often unintelligible, requiring interpreters even for simple proclamations. His health was so fragile that his own mother feared he might choke to death in his sleep. The king, who should have been a symbol of strength and stability, was instead a figure of pity and fear. The court tried to hide Charles's condition from the public, but rumors and whispers spread quickly. Foreign diplomats who met the king were shocked by his appearance and behavior, and the Spanish court became the subject of gossip and speculation across Europe. Some believed Charles was cursed or bewitched, a victim of dark magic or divine punishment. This belief was so strong that the court resorted to exorcisms, hoping to rid the king of the demons they believed possessed him. These exorcisms were not private affairs. They were public spectacles held in the royal palace, attended by nobles and foreign dignitaries. Priests would perform elaborate rituals, forcing Charles to drink holy water mixed with ground-up relics, pressing crucifixes against his skin, and shouting Latin prayers over his convulsing body. The king, already weak and confused, would vomit, shake uncontrollably, and sometimes lose consciousness. The priests interpreted these reactions as evidence of demons being expelled, but in reality, they were likely symptoms of his failing health and the harsh treatments he endured. The exorcisms reached a peak in 1699, when the chief exorcist claimed to have identified and expelled 47 different demons from Charles's body. Each demon was said to be responsible for a different aspect of the king's condition, from his physical deformities to his mental instability. The king was so exhausted by these rituals that he collapsed and did not speak for 3 days afterward. While the court clung to supernatural explanations, the reality was that Charles was suffering from a complex combination of genetic disorders and chronic illnesses that 17th century medicine could neither understand nor treat. His body was deteriorating rapidly, and his organs were failing one by one. The most devastating consequence of Charles's condition was his inability to produce an heir. The continuation of the dynasty depended on the king's fertility, but Charles was functionally impotent. His reproductive organs were underdeveloped, described by contemporary doctors as infantile. This meant that despite 2 marriages, he fathered no children. His first wife, Marie-Louise of Orleans, was a French princess who arrived in Spain expecting to marry a strong and capable king. Instead, she found herself bound to a man whose physical and mental limitations made consummating the marriage impossible. The wedding night was reportedly a disaster, with Marie-Louise emerging in tears and Charles confused and distressed. The court blamed Marie-Louise for the lack of children, subjecting her to humiliating medical examinations and treatments. She was forced to drink herbal concoctions, undergo painful procedures, and endure constant scrutiny. The psychological toll was immense, and some historians suggest that the stress and treatments contributed to her early death at the age of 26. After Marie-Louise's death, Charles remarried Maria Anna of Neuburg. By this time, Charles's health had deteriorated further, and Maria Anna soon realized that producing an heir was impossible. The court brought in the best doctors from across Europe, consulted ancient fertility texts, and even attempted magical remedies, but nothing worked. The failure to produce an heir plunged Spain into a political crisis. When Charles died in 1700 without a successor, the Spanish throne was left vacant. Multiple European powers had claims to the throne, and the resulting conflict, the War of Spanish Succession, would engulf the continent in a decade-long bloodbath, killing hundreds of thousands and reshaping the balance of power in Europe. The irony of Charles's life and death is staggering. The Habsburgs had spent centuries obsessively controlling marriages to concentrate power and preserve their bloodline. Yet their final king was so genetically damaged that he could not fulfill the most basic biological function required of a monarch, producing an heir. When Charles died, an autopsy was performed that revealed horrors beyond what anyone had imagined. His heart was shriveled and blackened, no larger than a walnut, and his lungs were corroded and gangrenous. His intestines were rotting inside his body, and his brain was surrounded by an abnormal amount of fluid, explaining his intellectual disabilities. The royal physician who conducted the autopsy described Charles's body as a miracle for having sustained life for so long despite containing no healthy organs. The findings were so disturbing that the official report was initially suppressed, deemed too shocking for public consumption. But the details eventually leaked out, confirming the worst fears of those who had whispered about curses and dark magic. Charles II's life is a tragic testament to the dangers of unchecked ambition and the limits of human biology. His story is not just about a deformed king, but about the devastating consequences of a dynasty's obsession with power and purity. It is a story that continues to fascinate and horrify, reminding us that sometimes the greatest enemy of absolute power is not revolution or invasion. It is biology itself. Charles II's tragic story is not just a tale of physical deformity and personal suffering. It is a profound lesson in how the pursuit of power can blind even the most powerful families to the consequences of their actions. The Habsburg dynasty's obsession with maintaining a pure bloodline through inbreeding was a gamble with human genetics that ultimately destroyed their legacy. The Habsburg jaw, the most visible sign of this genetic decline, was more than a cosmetic issue. It symbolized the deep-rooted problems caused by centuries of close relative marriages. This jaw deformity, medically known as mandibular prognathism, caused Charles's lower jaw to protrude so far forward that his lips could not meet. This made eating difficult, speech nearly unintelligible, and contributed to his overall frailty. But the jaw was just the tip of the iceberg. Charles's entire body was a physical manifestation of genetic damage. His skeletal structure was weak and malformed, his muscles underdeveloped, and his organs severely compromised. He was a man trapped in a body that was failing him at every turn. His inability to walk until the age of 8, his hunched posture, and his frail limbs were all symptoms of a body that had been twisted by generations of inbreeding. Yet, despite these challenges, Charles was king. He was expected to rule an empire that spanned continents, to command armies, to negotiate with foreign powers, and produce an heir who would continue the dynasty. The contrast between the expectations placed upon him and his physical and mental limitations was stark and tragic. The court's response to Charles's condition was a mixture of denial, superstition, and desperation. Unable to explain his deformities and illnesses through the medical knowledge of the time, they turned to the supernatural. Exorcisms were performed in the royal palace, with priests attempting to cast out demons they believed were tormenting the king. These rituals were brutal and humiliating, involving forced ingestion of holy water mixed with relics, physical manipulation, and hours of chanting. These exorcisms were not just religious ceremonies. They were political theater. Nobles and foreign dignitaries were forced to witness the king's suffering, reinforcing the narrative that Charles was a victim of dark forces rather than genetic misfortune. This belief in curses and witchcraft was a way for court to make sense of the inexplicable and to maintain the illusion of divine right and royal sanctity. Meanwhile, Charles's personal life was marked by isolation and tragedy. His 2 marriages, both politically motivated, failed to produce an heir. His first wife, Marie-Louise of Orleans, was subjected to blame and mistreatment, despite being innocent of any infertility. The pressure and humiliation she endured likely contributed to her early death. His second wife, Maria Anne of Neuburg, faced the grim reality that the king's condition made producing an heir impossible. The failure to secure a successor plunged Spain into a political crisis. The War of Spanish Succession was not just a battle for territory. It was a war born from the genetic and political failures of a dynasty. The conflict involved multiple European powers, each with claims to the Spanish throne, and resulted in a decade of warfare that devastated the continent. Charles II's autopsy revealed the full extent of his physical decline. His heart was described as shriveled and blackened, his lungs corroded and gangrenous, and his intestines rotting inside his body. His brain was surrounded by an abnormal amount of fluid, explaining his intellectual disabilities. The royal physician's report was so shocking that it was initially suppressed, but the details eventually leaked, confirming the fears and rumors that had surrounded the king for decades. The autopsy findings were so extreme that they seemed to confirm the supernatural beliefs rather than dispel them. How could a man survive with organs so damaged unless some dark force was at work? This tragic irony underscored the limits of contemporary medicine and the power of superstition in shaping historical narratives. Charles II's life and death serve as a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked ambition and the human cost of political power. His story is a reminder that behind the grandeur of royal courts and the glittering crowns lies a complex web of biology, politics, and human frailty. As we look back on Charles II, we see more than a deformed king. We see a symbol of a dynasty's downfall, a man whose body bore the scars of centuries of inbreeding, and whose death triggered a war that reshaped Europe. His legacy is a testament to the fact that sometimes the greatest enemy of power is not an external force, but the very nature of human biology. If this story has captured your imagination, there are countless other royal mysteries and historical secrets waiting to be uncovered. From the hidden scandals of monarchs to forgotten tragedies of empires, history is full of stories that challenge our understanding of power, legacy, and humanity. Thank you for joining me on this journey into the dark and fascinating world of Charles II of Spain. If you want to explore more stories like this, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. What other royal mysteries should we investigate next? The past is full of secrets, and together we can uncover them.